Hello, everybody. This is James Diboe, Discovering, dedicated to original peoples as always. We got a special guest on. This is like his fourth time back. I have to keep bringing this brother back because he's got so much information, a wealth of knowledge. How you doing, Mr. Robin Walker? How you doing, my brother?
Life is really good, I can't complain, seriously.
Great, great, great. Yeah, well, you know what? I've always got to keep calling you back. It's just hope, and I really appreciate your time and giving me the opportunity to always get some great information to share with the people. Now, today we're going to speak on your trip to Ethiopia. And Ethiopia, it's a lot of history there. And if you could give us a little breakdown of what did you experience when you went to Ethiopia? Where did you go? What did you see there?
All right. This was my second trip to Ethiopia.
Okay.
The first trip was in April of last year. And me and a group of people, we flew into Addis Ababa. And in Addis Ababa, we visited the National Museum. And the National Museum has got very ancient artifacts and prehistoric artifacts. So the skeleton of Lucy or Dinkenesh is there. And then also there are the first capital city in Ethiopia is a city called Yeha. And Yeha has artifacts going back to the 9th century BC. And they had sculptures, they had monograms, they had some really good material. And then the next capital was Aksum, and then there was another capital called Lalibela, and so on. So that was one major place. Another place that we went to was the Institute of Ethiopic Studies, which is one of Haile Selassie's palaces. That had church art going back to the Middle Ages. And that was, again, very, very impressive. And then, with the help of Her Excellency, the Minister of Tourism, we flew to Lalibela and we saw the city of underground churches.
Okay. Wow.
So we spent, I think, 2 days, 3 days, I can't remember, in Lalibela. A lot of us took photographs, a lot of us took film footage. And in the recent trip, the trip that was in December, it was mostly meeting officials. But certainly the first trip is where we got to see a lot of material.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, Ethiopia, it's definitely got a lot of history there. Now, if we go back to the oldest artifacts, or I understand we got, Lucy going, I don't know, 1.8 million, 2 point something million years ago. But
Yeah.
as far as before Kemet,
Mhm.
is there anything that you find that's older than Kemet as far as civilization, a writing system, or anything like that? Any artifacts?
Well, in Ethiopia?
Yeah,
No. Ethiopia is still relevant to the story, though, because the scholars believe that because Ethiopia and surrounding countries, Eritrea and so on and so forth, they have huge linguistic variety. And when you've got linguistic variety, they believe that lots and lots of different languages spoken in the same area, that represents a point of origins for that language group. And there's a
right.
family of languages called Afro-Asiatic. Now, don't be fooled by the name hyphen Asiatic. Don't be
Yeah,
fooled by it. It's an African language family.
that's
And
it.
the languages that make up Afro-Asiatic are the Semitic languages, Cushitic, Oromo. Oromo is Omotic, people call it. Um, Berber, the language spoken by the desert Berbers. Um, so a load of languages, including ancient Egyptian, originated as part of this Afro-Asiatic family. And scholars have tried to pin down where did this language family originate, and the evidence says somewhere in and around Ethiopia. So one school says in the north of Ethiopia, where Eritrea is. Another school says in the south of Ethiopia, where Ethiopia shares a border with Kenya.
Okay.
Another school says Central Sudan, which is not Ethiopia, but it's next door. So wherever that language family originated, it means that your first Egyptians, your first Berbers, your first Semites were all Africans from somewhere in East Africa, be it north of Ethiopia, south of Ethiopia, or west of Ethiopia. Get
Okay.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And therefore, the ancestors of the people that would then come to speak ancient Egyptian would have been migrants from there.
Okay. Right. So with the Ethiopia now, when we talk
Mhm.
about the Kushites, when would you refer to like as when we study the migration coming from that area, and not only just Ethiopia, some Dr. Ben Yoshib Ben Yakin spoke. It came from the foothills of the Mountains of the Moon, which is more further down, close to Uganda area.
Yeah.
So, as far as so this movement, would you consider as a civilized movement, or it was more primitive, coming from the south regions?
It would have been primitive.
Primitive, okay,
Would have
okay,
been primitive. They're not building civilizations yet.
okay,
And there's lots of evidence that, as you say, people came from even further south
yeah,
because the Egyptian heaven, the Egyptian concept of heaven, or Amenta, is the Uganda type of region.
yeah,
And we know this because some of the places in the Book of the Dead mirror the Great Lakes region. So there's, for example, a lake of fire described in the Book of the Dead. And that lake of fire, they believe they can identify exactly which lake in the Uganda Great Lakes region that is. Similarly, in the Book of the Dead, there's a reference to snakes being 28 feet long. Now, there aren't any snakes that long in Central Africa, but there are snakes that are longer than usual in Central Africa. And we believe that the Book of the Dead exaggeration is those same snakes. So the Book of the Dead's heaven is definitely the Uganda, Great Lakes, that kind of region.
okay. I think the last time I spoke to you about, you hear about Ethiopians using the monsoon winds to sail to India.
That
Now,
wasn't them. That wasn't them.
oh, wasn't them. Okay.
That
Was
was the
that
Swahilis. But the Ethiopians
okay?
definitely had shipping.
Right. Okay.
They definitely had shipping and they were sailing the seas. Yeah, but the ones using the monsoons, that was the Swahilis, that wasn't them.
Okay. Now I want to listen to people like Clyde Winters, who we spoke about last time, Dr. Clyde
Yeah,
Winters. Now
yeah.
he speaks a lot about the Kushites very early, like early times, and there's times when he'll speak about like when the Indus Valley was set up and that. And now don't get me wrong, sometimes he'll refer to it as in they went to Samaria first and then worked their way
Mhm,
across. But then sometimes he'll show you the through the monsoon winds. Have you
mhm.
seen any of this in actually recorded history, or is this something from his archaeology that he's came up with, or
Let me answer that.
hmm,
Um, okay, let me answer that. This is what's confusing the issues. Yeah.
yeah,
There's at least two different definitions of what a Kushite is.
okay,
Right?
yeah,
Okay, if you're using the term linguistically, then the Kushites are in Ethiopia, Somalia, and those kind of places. If you're using it historically, ancient Kush is Sudan, which is next door.
okay, yeah,
See,
yeah,
and the ancient people of Sudan, Kush, they didn't speak Kushitic. They spoke Nilo-Saharan, which is a different language family.
okay,
Yeah.
like the Maasai, yeah,
Yeah, so that's what confuses the picture. And then in some books, they translate the word Kush to mean Ethiopia and the word Ethiopia to mean Kush.
That's
right?
confusing that sometimes. Yeah, yeah.
And if you read ancient Greek records, they refer to the people of the Middle East, the people of India, and even further on, they call them all Ethiopians.
Right.
And this is where the idea came from that there was a migration from Ethiopia. I don't think that's what's going on.
What do you reckon the reason was that they
I don't think
said
that's what's
that?
going on. Yeah, let me answer that. Because um, Black people were the first people on the planet. And when Black people left Africa and migrated all over the world, some of them are evolved into non-Black complexions, and some of them kept their coloring. And the
Yeah.
ones that kept their coloring would be the ancestors of the what became the Sumerians, what became the Elamites, what became the Dravidians, what became the Black Arabs. Those were the ones that kept their coloring. But that
Okay.
doesn't mean that they recently hot-footed out of Ethiopia or
Yeah.
hot-footed out of Kush. They
Yeah.
would have been there thousands of years
They just
before.
kept the phenotype and the
Right.
complexion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when the Greeks now came on the scene thousands and thousands and thousands of years later, and they visited these places, they noticed, wait a minute, these people are Ethiopians. These people are Ethiopians. But what they meant by that is these people are black. These people are black. These people are black. You
Right.
see,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it
Interesting.
doesn't mean they recently hot-footed from Ethiopia or Sudan.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. I mean, like Dr. Ranok Rashidi also, he spoke on. I was reading his book. Well, it's actually Advanced Africans of Asia. And
Mhm.
there's a person, he's done a few interviews. He's actually an Indian man. He passed away maybe a year or two ago. Dr. Amelie, can't remember his full name anyway, but he was speaking on Ethiopians going to India 8,000 years ago. And
Mhm.
then, now I don't know where he gets his evidence from, or now
Again, that could well be just black people
it could just
became
be,
the first
yeah,
inhabitant. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, because that's what I mean. It's sometimes it's like, well,
But let me
people
add,
looking, yeah.
let me add though some of the confusion. Um, I met up with one of my co-researchers. His name is Emmanuel Adama, and he's researching things like crops. And there are crops that started off in West Africa that ended up in India. And we're looking at dates like 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. Now, these dates would be a migration of people bringing those crops. Do you see?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that happened as well.
Okay. Now with trade, I mean, we've
Yeah.
got to try and like think like, well, when people trade, sometimes there's some people who might intermarry, for example.
Yeah.
So, like when we look at DNA, if we try to look at like, well, what African DNA shows up in India? I'm not talking about the CDs and
Mhm.
or anything to do with slaves being brought over.
Yeah.
Now, it's always very difficult to find anything like that unless the DNA seems to.
But it doesn't mean there isn't any evidence.
Look at the,
See,
yeah, yeah,
one of the issues that we're
true.
going to have is in order to be able to isolate which piece of DNA came from where, you would need to have honest scholarship.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because what will happen is if you have dishonest scholarship, they will present people that are indigenous that aren't. And they will then present people that really were indigenous as if they weren't there at all. Do
yeah,
you see? Especially if those people are black.
yeah, yeah.
So consequently, the DNA is not definitive unless we clear that up.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
So in other words, you can't just read the DNA just by itself. You have to put it into a context. Otherwise, people will fool you.
I mean, I'm aware of like, in India anyway, the Hindus, they probably suppress a lot of things and that, they don't mind speaking on slaves being brought over, the negative things, but they don't really
Yeah.
like to discuss anything about African migration. Now, here's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Africans are always very honest when they spoke about Chinese and Indians or Arabs
Mhm.
coming, sailing, and doing trade. You've always talked about it. In Kenya, you've heard about it. You've heard in some
Yeah.
other parts. But to be honest about it, but you never seem to see the Chinese say, "Yo, Africans were coming here trading." You never
Oh, they
really.
did. They
Oh,
did.
okay,
What it is we haven't read that material.
okay. It's not really out there the way Africans is more
Well,
out there.
you got to remember though, what it
Yeah,
is we're learning about the world through a European lens because it's
that's
quite
true. Yeah,
possible that the Chinese are a lot more honest.
yeah.
But so let me give you some examples that I actually know about. When I wrote When We Ruled, one of the books that I used to research it was Basil Davidson's uh, Old Africa Rediscovered. And that book came out in 1959. Classic book, trust me on that one. And Davidson, the great part of the book is when he's dealing with the Swahilis. Davidson was the one that overturned the lies that the Swahili civilization is Arab or Persian. He was the one that proved that is actually East African. Now, he quotes a Chinese source that mentions a trader and the trader visiting China. And as Basil Davidson put it, we could reasonably read the Chinese characters as calling this trader, they give his name and then they give his title, the Zanj. The
Zanj,
Zanj.
yeah. The Zand
Right,
rebellion times and that. Yeah,
right. That identifies that trader as Swahili. And the Chinese record mentions how many quantity of silver the Chinese authorities gave him to take back to Africa. Do you see?
yeah,
And that's in, I think, an 11th or 12th century document, according to Basil Davidson. Second example is there's a very famous monument in West Africa called the Great Mosque of Djenné. Anyone that studies with me, I talk about this building all the time. It's the grandest piece of West African medieval architecture. And basically, it looks like an overgrown sandcastle. Brilliant piece of architecture. Now, there's a replica of that building in South Korea, for real. And the one in South Korea is in the capital city of the South Koreans, Jeju-do, or one of the capitals, Jeju-do. And why it was built was the South Koreans have a whole bunch of African artifacts that they've collected over the last 1,000 years or whatever it is. And they wanted, well, we've got all these African artifacts. What should we do with them? And it was decided that they were going to build an African style building and then house these artifacts in the building. Now, here's the question. How did the Koreans get hold of those artifacts? They are trade artifacts.
yeah.
Trade artifacts that that were collected between them and East Africans trading. And they had so many of these artifacts, they've recently built the museum. So those of you watching this, Google Museum of African Art in Jeju-do, South Korea, and be amazed that it looks just like the Great Mosque of Djenné in West Africa, because they specifically modeled it. So that's proof then of actual trade, actual contact. And the Koreans know this. And I always teach my students, aren't you ashamed that there are Koreans that know more about your history and heritage than you do?
Yeah, really embarrassing. Definitely.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So now you seem funny enough, like you were saying about 1950, was it, do you say 57 or 53 when you were talking about the writings of Africans trading in China? The Swahili.
59, 1959.
59, 59. Now, do you find that like more of the honest scholars are more back in history as we go on? Or, I mean, today with all this technology, with all this, you know, how do you find it as far as today, as far as the research is going? Do you feel like that it's gone more, it's leaped forward a lot, or is it kind of like declined a bit of suppressed information?
It's a complicated picture.
Yeah, definitely.
Complicated picture. There are examples where things have moved ahead. So, for example, there's a white American scholar called Christopher Ehret, who has just written a book on African history where he's including the ancient Egyptians, including them as Black Africans.
Okay.
And that book has gone mainstream. Even the Sunday Telegraph gave that book a review and the thumbs up, right? So that's an example where things have moved forward. But as far as we Black scholars, I don't see enough of us in the field. I'm doing my
Okay.
thing. Where everybody else at? If
Yeah.
you consider that When We Ruled came out in 2006 was the first edition, there should have been tons of books coming out. People reading African history should have hundreds of books to be choosing from, all of them written by us, where we're putting our different interpretations. We don't have to agree with each other, but we have
Yeah.
to agree to put the material out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that really didn't happen. Oh, and on that subject as well, before I forget, in Ethiopia, on my trips, I did come across a lot of new information. And I'm serious, a lot of information where the stuff isn't older than Kemet, but the stuff is old.
Yeah. Okay.
The stuff is grand. The stuff is impressive.
So what do you think, when people like speak about the Ethiopian Bible being the oldest Bible in the world, is
Some truth, some truth.
is there some
It's not,
truth to that?
yeah, it's not completely true, but some of that would stand up in court. This is what would stand up in court.
Okay.
There is an Ethiopian version of the Bible called the Abba Garima Gospels. And the Abba Garima Gospels were originally thought to be 11th century, 12th century. Scholars now think it was produced somewhere between 330 and 650 AD. And it's an illustrated Bible. And the Daily Telegraph put out an article, which I use as teaching material. That is the oldest illustrated manuscript in the world. So when we're looking at Christian manuscripts, it used to be thought that the first decorated Bibles were things like the Book of Kells and, books with Celtic knots in them and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Now know that chapter 1 of producing a Christian Bible with illustrations in it, chapter 1 is the Abba Garima Gospels. Therefore, the whole art style of taking a Bible and decorating it, the Ethiopians were the first to do it. Yeah. All right. Now, they also have in their Bibles things that other people don't have. So, for example, the book of Enoch, the most complete version is theirs. And they have other books that people don't have. And their Christianity is very different to everybody else's as well. Their Christianity, their Christianity is better described as Judeo-Christianity. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, from a halakha perspective, a lot of Ethiopians could go to Israel and say we're Jews, and that would stand up in court.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't just mean the falashas. I mean the ones that call themselves Christians could do that because they follow the Old Testament.
Interesting. Yeah.
So consequently, Ethiopian Christianity is really Judeo-Christianity. I mean, I didn't know this until I went there. So all the feasts, the fasts, all of that stuff, they do all of that. Yeah.
Right. So, when I mentioned to you last time about also I'd like to speak on the connection with Ethiopia and Arabia, Yemen, these areas and that. Before, obviously, the time of Islam, if you go back even like to Aksum or even before Aksum, as far as, speaking about the Sabians and these type of people.
I can tell you that, yeah. The relationship between Ethiopia and Yemen, scholars don't really know. One theory is the Yemenites created civilization and brought it to Ethiopia. A second theory is the Ethiopians created civilization and brought it to Yemen. And the third theory is both of them created civilization and created two sides of the same culture without necessarily A conquering B or B conquering A. Yeah?
Yeah.
And there's lots of evidence on both sides. Lots of evidence. Now, here's the thing. What I saw in the Addis Ababa National Museum is the artifacts from that period. And that period is 9th century BC to 6th century BC. And the capital of Ethiopia at the time was called Yeha. And Yeha has a famous temple. And they had photographs of it in the museum. And they had some of the artifacts. And two of the artifacts show a fat woman with short woolly hair. And she is dressed just like a Sudanese queen mother, right?
Yeah.
And she's clearly on a throne, right? I believe that's where the whole mythology of the Queen of Sheba came from. I think that's her.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, I think that nobody else has said that in print. I put it to a lot of the Ethiopian officials, and they thought, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I think of that? Yeah. But the sculptures are there. They're in the museum. They also have writing. And if you think the Ethiopians created the writing, then the early writing is called Proto-Ethiopic. If you think the Arabs came up with the writing, then you would call it Proto-Sabian.
Yeah, Sabian.
And no doubt you could come up with a hybrid name if you think they both came up with it independently or whatever. Yeah. So the writing systems are similar. And yeah, there's bear writing that has survived from that period. We know that among the artifacts, the Ethiopians were highly literate because among the things that have survived have been people's personal monograms. And the monograms are shapes that they're made out of copper. They're about this big. And they've got the letters. And you would press it into something. And then that's your name stamped on the tin. This is 9th to 6th centuries BC, Bridgwin. Right?
Yeah. See.
They also found the ruins of they think it's either a palace or an administrative center. And that's where they think the ruler lived. And the museum said the Germans excavated it and they said it was more than 4 stories. Did you hear that?
Yeah. Wow.
Then a friend of mine, my research colleague, he said, no, that's old scholarship. The Germans have since done another reconstruction of that same structure, and they believe the body of the administrative building was 5 stories. And there was a central column that was 8 stories. This is 800 BC. Wow. An 8-story building. Are you feeling this?
Yes, definitely.
So you've got 8-story buildings, you've got writing, you've got monograms, you've got temples. You follow me? So this is how the Ethiopians were going on 800 BC. And then, of course, the Yemenis on the other side of the Red Sea had a very similar culture. According to Drusilla Dungy Houston, you may know her book, Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire.
Yeah.
They had exactly the same type of agriculture. It's called terraced agriculture. That's how we know the culture's similar, because they've got very similar stuff. And it's possible that some Yemenis ended up in Ethiopia and some Ethiopians ended up in Yemen.
Yeah.
Fusing those 2 sides of the same culture.
Okay. Now, when did the trouble start? Like, for example, you know, the time Christianity, well, would have been going into Yemen, these areas, because there was a time when everything just seemed great at first. I mean, like, but was there some sort of what made the divide? The time of
between Ethiopia on one hand and Yemen on the other.
Yeah.
Islam coming on the scene.
Okay. Oh, when Islam came. So before Islam.
So what happened was Yemen had Jewish people there, black Jews, by the way.
Yeah.
They had Christians there, and they had Muslims there. Yeah. When Islam came on the scene, obviously they had Muslims there. But when Islam started to become a powerful religion, that's when the Yemenis adopted Islam, and the similarity, shared culture that it would have had with Ethiopia on the other side of the Red Sea. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
when they culturally moved in two different directions.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the time period we're talking about is the time of Islam, 639 AD-ish, that kind of time period where they started to move apart. Yeah.
Yeah.
But even during that period, there was a time period when Ethiopia actually invaded Yemen,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
Ethiopian king, well, he wasn't a king, he was a general called General Abraha, made himself king, and he wanted to convert the people of Arabia to Christianity, but he
Yeah.
was unsuccessful in his attempt to do that.
Okay. Okay. So during these times when what was Ethiopia's relationship with Rome, for example? You know, the time the Roman Empire was they were in North Africa.
Yeah.
What was
They,
their
they,
relationship like? Was it?
they weren't allies or anything like that. And as
Yeah.
far as I'm aware, there was trade, but there wasn't that much mixing or anything like that. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
they were rival powers. There's a Persian source from the third century. I think the Persian writer is called Mani. I might have my facts wrong. And he says there are four great powers in the world right now. And he's talking third century. And he lists them in order. He says the Persians were number one. He says the Romans were number two. He says the Ethiopians were number three. And he says the Chinese were number four. That would make Ethiopia the third most powerful state. And so consequently, there would have been some mixing it up with the Romans, but not as
Yeah.
much as you would think.
Okay.
Because we were not on, you know, that we today, we on some yes, sir, no, sir, three bags full, sir type of mentality. They
Yeah.
were not on that. And I'll
Okay.
give you an
Yeah.
example. There's a very famous story in Ethiopian history where, and it explains how they became Christian. And this is the story. The story says that there was a ship that had Europeans on it, and there was a Phoenician philosopher called Meropus, and there were two Syrian boys, Odysseus and Frumentius, and they're on this ship. And what happened was the Ethiopians stormed the ship and killed everybody except the two boys, the two Syrians. And the two Syrians just happened to be Christians. And those two Syrians were then brought to the king, and then that's when Ethiopia officially converted. Now,
Okay.
here's
Yeah.
the question. Why did they storm the ship and kill everybody? Answer, because some Europeans had sailed at a European port. They were disrespectful to Ethiopians. We don't know what the disrespect was, but we know they were disrespectful. So when the next ship came along and there were Europeans on it, they stormed the ship and killed everybody. Now, can you
Wow.
see that we were not on no yes, sir, no, sir, three bags full, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is how Ethiopia dealt with it. Man's them took the Mickey, man's them's going to get spanked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that they were very powerful. What can we say? Very powerful Ethiopia. Not
And,
yes
and,
people
and
at all.
absolutely, absolutely. And so consequently, a lot of people, when we're writing the history, exaggerate where how powerful the Romans were and how powerful the Greeks were, when you're just exaggerating because you're looking at it from a European perspective today. In them
Yeah. Yeah.
days, as I said, that was the third most powerful state on planet Earth.
Yeah. So see with the Arabia, for example, you know, during the time of the Roman Empire, s- did the Romans invade Arabia from the north or anywhere like that?
As far as I'm aware, no.
No, they were okay,
No.
okay.
And also during the Roman period, I know that Arabia was one of the richest countries on earth during that period.
Wow.
Seriously wealthy. But again, the wealth was the south, yeah, the Yemen.
Itself, yeah, yeah,
Region. So if you read the accounts by the Europeans of that time period, they always big up Yemeni's wealth.
yeah,
But no, but as far as if anybody could be argued to be conquering, we know that there were definitely Ethiopian kings that sent troops into Yemen. It wasn't just General Abraha. There were people before that. There was a king called Gadara. Gadara is about 183 AD. We know he sent troops into Yemen. And there was another one as well. So their inscriptions say this. So if anyone's conquering Yemen, it's actually Ethiopia during this time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I was aware of like the Persians always, they were coming into Arabia and then.
They tried a thing. They definitely tried it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's an account which says that the Persians their troops were ordered to slay all men with black skin and woolly hair. There's definitely a Persian account that says that.
Wow. And then there's all these different kind of Turks, like Seljuk Turks, and there's all these so many different type of Turks as well, like came into.
Yeah, that's later on in the game though.
Yeah, later on, yeah. Even before the Ottomans and that, Yeah. So Ethiopia though, what would you say, like, as far as the origins of Ethiopians, do you find that Ethiopians are the oldest people? Now, some people might refer to Central Africa could be the oldest populations, a modern man, of what they call modern man.
No. For modern man, it's Ethiopia, as far as we know.
Modern man, but okay, as far as
Let me answer that. So what happens is this: in Ethiopia today, I met with loads of Ethiopian officials. They brand their country as the land of origins. That's the official branding, and they're basing that on Lucy Dinkinesh, and they're basing it on the oldest Homo sapiens sapiens. There's a site in Ethiopia. Where the hell's the site? The man from Kibish or Omo, yeah? And these skeletons, 195,000 years old, those are the oldest skeletons of Homo sapiens sapiens, exactly as we are today. Exactly as we are today. Now there are some controversial skeletons in South Africa at a site called Florisbad, which might be older, but we're not entirely sure whether they look like modern humans or not. You may have seen the Jebel Irhoud find, which is in Morocco.
Yeah, Morocco as well. Yeah.
This is the one that looks just like 50 Cent, right? But we're not sure whether all of the skull is a modern skull.
Yeah, because he said Morocco was 300,000 years ago, and also then they were writing it more. Yeah. But as far as the evidence, we don't know how factual that is.
No. The evidence is there, but whether that is a modern human. Certainly, the Moroccan has a modern human face, 50 Cent. Yeah. But it might not have a modern human skull.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Whereas something that's fully modern human is the sites in Ethiopia, Omo and Kibish. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Anyway. But yeah, we're coming there to the end anyway. But I really enjoyed this discussion anyway. And have you got any books coming out that you'd like to speak on before we finish off?
There is a new book hot off the press, and it's called A History of Africa. And it's a children's book aimed at people kind of 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, that kind of period. And that book is published by Franklin D. Watts Limited.
Okay.
Was it by Hachette? Whatever, because they're all branches of the same family, whatever. And that book has just dropped. So it's called A History of Africa. My name is on it, Robin Walker. And it's a hardback book, 48 pages, aimed at children.
Oh, thank you very much, Robin Walker. Great interview, full of knowledge. This is James Diboe, Discovering, dedicated to original peoples as always. And give thanks anyway, Robin. And great interview. Thanks again for coming. I appreciate it.